thank you, Rob and Stephanie, for inviting us today. Hello, everyone. I see some old friends, some new friends. I'm very happy to be here with you all. For those of you who don't know us, I am the Sam half of Sam and Brian.
I'm the Brian half.
Our company is called Better Change Tools. We have ourselves have our own consulting business where we have worked directly with clients for a few decades now. And Better Change Tools is more recent, but that's where we have taken all the assessments and tools and the system that we know has been successful for all our clients in the past in creating innovation, and now we're bringing it to other consultants to certify them, support them in bringing it to the wider world. And today we're going to talk about one of those tools that's all about the climate for innovation. Music to our ears to hear that what you're working on in your pilot, finding that there's this link between team climate and driving innovation outcomes, because outcome is ultimately what it's all about. As Rob said, feel free as we go. If you have questions, raise your hand or put something in the chat. We'll try and answer things as we go, but we'll also have some time at the end to circle back, and Rob's going to help us monitor if we get going and don't spot something. This is what we're going to focus on today. We'll talk about the underpinning research and history as we go into this thing we call climate, what it takes for an organization to innovate and grow, the key patterns, how we measure them, how they correlate to business success, and the role of leadership in all of that. And of course, you are the Innovation Leadership Group, right? And this is your definition of what Innovation Leadership Group means, and that's exactly what we hope to help contribute to today. How do you help others create and innovate? But first of all, big picture, what does it actually take to innovate and grow? And we base all our work in a piece of research that was done back at the foundational study in the year 2000 by PricewaterhouseCoopers, many studies that have validated it since. But this is the foundation. They went out in the world to try to discover what is it that separates the top performing organizations from the rest. Wide study, 478 companies across 7 countries, a wide variety of size and industry, and you can go and you can read it, but what it boils down to are these 3 things. That those organizations who perform better than anyone else, and you can see them in the green triangle on this screen, they paid deliberate attention to the development of 3 core capabilities in the organization. One of them at the top there is inclusive leadership, and that is about the engagement of the widest array of people and the diversity of their thinking preferences in coming up with opportunities for the organization, framing the problems to solve to go after those opportunities, generating the ideas to solve the problems and turning those ideas into solutions and action and innovation and growth. So the inclusion of the widest array of people in that. Deliberate process, depending on where in the world you sit right now, that is about the common language, framework and tools that organizations employ to move ideas through the system, right? Create value all the way along the innovation chain, and bring those people together. And then creative climate, which is what we're going to be talking about today. That's about the psychological environment that helps people to work at their best. And we're not talking about just general climate here, but we're talking about the climate that enables people to use their creativity to produce innovation and change. And so Brian's going to chat with us about what that climate word means.
Let's talk about climate, because we want to differentiate it from another word that's commonly used when you're thinking about working environments and contexts, which is culture. So we need to pull those apart. And so let's do that by starting with culture. So thinking about culture is more about the deep-seated values, beliefs, history, traditions that represent the foundation of a team organization, right? It's the bedrock upon which it's built. It's under the surface, but it's there, right? And it's foundational. So that's culture. It's more about what the team or the organization believes. That's different than climate. And this differentiation was first developed by Göran Ekvall, a Swedish organizational psychologist. So we'll talk a bit more about him as we go. But the way he talked about climate was more about the recurring patterns of behavior, attitudes, and feelings that characterize daily life in the team or in the organization. Right? So it's about what people experience day to day. So you have on one end belief systems and experience on the other. You think about the organization as a tree, right? The culture is more like the soil the tree is rooted in, right? It's under the surface, it's in the ground, it takes a long time to change. Where climate is more about the weather patterns, all right, around the tree, and sun, rain, wind, etc. Right? Both the weather patterns and the soil feed the tree. Right? Same thing where culture and climate feed the organization and the performance of it when it comes to innovation and growth. But if you think about climate and culture, which is easier to change? If you're an innovation leader, right, and innovation leadership is what you're about, which one of these would be easier, more readily changeable in order to impact innovation productivity, right? And it's climate. It's the experience people have on a daily basis. All right, so we've got to pull those apart. And what we're talking about today is climate rather than culture. Right? So let's unpack that a little bit further. Because what Ekvall was interested in was trying to understand what are those patterns that you can observe and see and feel and notice that people are engaging in the environment. And so think about climate as not the people themselves, but it's their patterns of interaction with each other. Right? That's what climate is about. And so what he found in his work, and he did this for over 50 years, starting in Sweden and then partnering with someone else, Isaacson, to turn this into more of a global look into climate patterns. But what he found was these 9 patterns were essential for innovation. And it started by his work. He's an organizational psychologist in Sweden, but he went into Volvo. So a real company looking at real situations to try to understand what was going on. He was originally brought in to help with the idea management system. That was his reason to go in back in the early 80s, late 70s. But what he found when he walked into 2 different facilities was the feel was very different in one plant versus another plant inside of Volvo. And there was this feeling that he had, which really resonated with him, because when he went over to the idea suggestion boxes that were hanging on the walls, he found one place was filled with ideas and the other one was filled with cigarette butts and ashes. In other words, no ideas. And it was the environment where he felt this energy is where the ideas were. So he realized maybe it's not the idea suggestion process. It's this feeling in the environment. And that triggered a 50-year search into what was it about that environment that made the difference around people's willingness to contribute ideas. And these are the patterns through his research that he found made the biggest difference. All right? And it's about an environment where when these patterns are in place and they're healthy, people are aligned and engaged with the strategy. Right? Their curiosity is stimulated to figure out, to explore, develop, and test new thinking. Right? And when people have ideas, there's like a social maturity around the new thinking that gives novelty a fighting chance. Right? So in general, that's what he noticed. And it was these 9 patterns. So we're going to unpack them and see what was going on inside of these. So when you think about this alignment and engagement thing, what was going on? These 3 dimensions, these patterns of observable behavior seem to resonate quite well. So challenge and involvement was about the emotional involvement and engagement that people had in their work, from big picture strategy thinking down to specific tactics. How emotionally involved and engaged, intrinsically motivated by the work itself. And could you see that in people's behavior? And freedom was this autonomy, this ability to engage in interdependence around decision making, structuring their day, sharing and receiving of information, right? Idea exchange, information exchange. How present was that in people's ability to design their day in a way that enabled that to happen? That was freedom, autonomy. And then risk taking, right? Innovation, growth was all about, if we're going to try something new and try something different, it's not all fully understood, right? So there has to be what we call risk taking, which is a tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty. And it's a tolerance of it, because people don't just jump into, oh, let's be ambiguous about stuff, right? You have to tolerate it enough to to encourage people to take the risks, even though things are uncertain in how they're going to play out. And do you see that in their behavior concretely, right? So that was all. And when those patterns are in place, people were more likely to be aligned and engaged in what the strategy is to bring innovation to life in the organization, the team, or in the ecosystem. All right, so that's about patterns around alignment and engagement. If you want innovation and change, right, and if you want people to use their creativity to make that happen, things like idea support, playfulness and humor, and time are particularly relevant. So for example, in a team or an organization, idea time is the fact that people have time and actually use it to explore, develop, and test new thinking. Right? It's just not a theory. They actually do it, and you can see it in their work. And it's not just brainstorming, right? It's actually thinking it through, testing, revisiting, etc. So they have the time to do that. When they take the time to do that, what they also found, what Eckvall found, is this pattern of playfulness and humor, which is more about spontaneity and ease that's demonstrated in people and in the way they approach work and the way they approach their interactions with each other. Where this is particularly relevant, right, is if you're trying to bring imagination to produce creativity and innovation, right, it requires people to be playful. Not just like, let's go to the pub after and have a nice beer, right? That's after work. This is about playfulness, about work, during work. And do you see it in the patterns of behavior that people are engaging in? As serious as the work is, can they be also approaching it with a bit of a playful frame of mind? All right. And then idea support is if someone does come up with something unusual or different, or even just non-routine, how is it received? Idea support is how new ideas are treated. And what's the behavior you notice the moment of truth or innovation? Someone shares an idea with someone else. How is it received? Is it crushed on the vine and said, no, we can't do that because? Is that what prevails? Or, no, that's interesting. Let's explore that a bit further. That pattern of behavior made a big difference in the likelihood that innovation would thrive. And therefore, will people use their curiosity to try to make it happen? So real concrete patterns of behavior there. But then there's this additional set of things where there's like a social maturity around the new thinking that people produce, right? And so part of it, it's in the relationships they have. And that shows up in trust and openness, for example, which is about emotional safety in relationships. So if you and I feel emotionally safe with each other, we trust each other, we're much more likely to share our thinking with each other, our ideas, our thoughts, things that are not well thought through, things we're confident in, much more likely to be open. Ideas get shared, information gets shared. So that happens when we trust each other. But what's interesting too about ideas is when we share ideas with each other, they often produce tension, right? And what's interesting about tension is it can be good tension or bad tension. It's like cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. This is the good and bad tension inside of an environment when people are socially interacting around ideas. The good tension, the good cholesterol is called debate, right? Where we can have an argument, a disagreement about viewpoints, opinions, information, expertise. We argue with each other about the ideas. The tension stays on the idea, right? It's a debate. That's good tension. But when that tension gets personalized, where all of a sudden the tension is now about the relationship. I don't like your idea, therefore I don't like you. And I'm going to help you fail with this. And I'm going to set some traps so you don't succeed, etc., etc. That's called conflict. And of the 9 dimensions, it's the only one that Eckvall found that was negatively correlated with innovation and growth. Creativity needed to do it. So that's emotional tension in relationships. Less of that is better. All right. So it's how does the tension play out? because tension is neither positive nor negative, it's how it gets translated. When it's debate, it's a good thing. When it's climate, it's not. All right? So those are the patterns that Eckfall found, and throughout the years studied, researched, and found differentiated a healthy climate from an unhealthy one when it comes to creativity, innovation, and change. And how do we know this works? How do we know it actually makes a difference? Those 9 patterns, right? He partnered up with someone named Harry Nystrom, did a lot of work in England as well. And what they did was they wanted to find out, do those 9 patterns have a difference? Do they make an effect on the outcomes of creativity? In other words, innovation. Do the ideas turn into value? And so over 25 years, they studied organizations and the climate patterns within them. And Nystrom in particular studied the organizations, looking at their commercial success, the way how fast they could move new ideas, turn them into products and services, and get them to the market. Real definition of innovation, right? And he looked at the technical novelty in those products and services and the market novelty. How new, how different were they, right? And that's how they sorted the organizations. And they found they could look at innovative, average, and stagnated organizations. How fast and effective they were able to do that. In fact, of those organizations, they were about commercial success. Innovative organizations, highly commercially successful. 4 out of the 5 stagnated organizations are out of business. They became so weak they couldn't survive, or they just basically went out of business, right? Not able to move innovation through the system. So the question is, with that outcome productivity, where does climate play? What's the relationship? And this is what they found. So this is used as an assessment. We'll talk about it in a minute. But on a scale of 0 to 300, looking at how present was that pattern of behavior in those different organizations? 25 points, a difference significant to look at. If you look at the experience, think about the energy that's in the innovative versus the stagnated companies. There's over a 25-point difference on all the dimensions. So much more challenge and involvement, emotional engagement, freedom and autonomy, idea time, etc. Life in the innovative organization is very different than in the stagnated one when it comes to the experience of daily life, right? One thing to notice here, remember, conflict less is a better thing. So when you notice in the innovative organizations, much less conflict than there is in the stagnated ones. And if you think about conflict and debate as that interaction, in innovative companies, the interaction is a healthy one around the ideas, but in a stagnated company, it kind of hurts because it's mostly characterized as personal warfare and tension and emotional challenge in relationships. All right? So direct correlations between the experience people have on the patterns of climate and the innovative productivity, commercial success of the organizations. And that's over 25 years of research.
All right, so we use a tool to measure climate, and not just measure but intervene on climate, called the Situational Outlook Questionnaire. And that was the tool that Eckfall and then and working with Isaacson developed, and we now publish this as Better Change Tools. So Situational Outlook Questionnaire being the big mouthful, we refer to it now as the SOQ. This is an assessment. It takes 15 minutes. It is a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions. The quantitative questions are about people objectively observing the patterns of behavior in their working environments around various specifics. And then we have qualitative questions that ask what help and hinder their creativity, what kind of actions they would take to improve the climate. And these add color and robustness to the assessment and allow us to get to specifics and target what it is that a team or organization can take action on in order to improve their climate. It's a different approach from your average and broad engagement survey or best place to work assessments or so on. It's very squarely focused on those climate patterns of behavior. The SOQ has a ton of scientific credentials. As Brian said, it's the result of 50 plus years of work, huge amount of science, research, empirical evidence, etc., and over 30,000 assessments that have now been done globally, some of them by Rob. And the beauty of it is that The SOQ, we have the international benchmarks that Brian just talked about. From all that research, we're able to see when your team or your organization or your client's team, your client's organization is taking the SOQ, we can look at the results comparatively against innovative and stagnated organizations, and that helps them target where to focus their innovation efforts. And we'll show you some more in-depth case examples, but just to give you an idea, these are some examples from real companies where they've done the assessment and they've realized that they have an opportunity, right, about 1, 2, 3 or more of the particular climate dimensions, the climate patterns. But it's hard to say, all right, so, idea support, for example. We haven't scored very well on idea support, but it's the qualitative piece that allows us to unpack what might be going on in the area of idea support where we can actually intervene and do some real work to improve the climate. So idea support, for example, that could be about, there's a particular problem with the way a team is giving one another feedback around things and not critical enough or too harsh and cutting things off. That could be an issue. Or what could be an issue, for example, is what you have here. How might we elevate the voice of operations? This is an operations team who had lots of great ideas about how they might better move innovation through the system, but they weren't being brought into the decision-making chain early enough to be able to be effective in putting that stuff into practice. So how could they elevate their voice? And so that was very specific area that we could target. And that what makes the difference, right? That's what means we can intervene on climate very specifically in order to make a difference to that climate and then innovation and growth.
So some examples when an innovation leader really decides to go at it when it comes to these kind of patterns, what can happen, right? You have it in your leadership capabilities competency framework, right? And so what happens when climate is part of that mix and you have it in there, which is really great. Here's an example of an energy technology company. This is the R&D division of this company. And so they had a bunch of things going on, needed to turn this around because they were losing $7 million a year in this one small department, right? And so they needed to turn it around quick. In fact, they were losing $8 million, quite a bit. And so new leader comes in, right? Innovation leader needs to raise up the innovation performance of the group. But the problem he had was there was so much tension. People were despondent. They were just uncommitted to results. Just nothing was happening. It just slowed down. So we did a climate assessment to give them some sense of where, diagnose what's going on now and where do we start. So you notice on the 9 dimensions, those numbers represent their scores. The gold circles represent where they were significantly different off the benchmark of innovative companies, right? There's only one place they matched the benchmark, which was debate. So we said, okay, given all of that, senior exec team looking at how can we invoke these dimensions to increase the likelihood that innovation is going to happen. So they targeted, like we said, when you target challenge and involvement, like emotional engagement, trust and openness, playfulness and humor, and idea support. Let's go after that. So what they did, they initiated a bunch of actions to do that, from having more all-employee meetings to directly involving the employees in the thinking about the strategy and how they were going to bring it to life, and a bunch of other things, reinforcement, recognition programs, a lot of different activities to go after those things. The question is, what was the effect on climate when they implemented a bunch of action? When we did the second assessment a little over a year later, you can see those blue boxes. All of those now are aligned at the innovative productivity levels, at least according to the benchmark. And they significantly moved all their targets, all 4 dimensions. And in addition, they also lowered the conflict and raised the debate, things they didn't deliberately target, but they still improved. All right. And so, yes, climate improved. Did that make any difference on the business? Yep. So they're losing $8 million a year. 18 months later, they were made a $7 million turnaround. And then in the following year, they were predicting profit, and they did it. So in about 2.5 years, they went from losing $8 million a year to being profitable. And in a company of about 185,000 people, this small group won the International Innovation Award. putting forward the products they produced up against the rest of the company, and they won the award. So huge difference financially, but also in recognition of real innovation being produced.
So that's an 18-month-long plus endeavor. You can also turn climate around really quickly. This is a company that was preparing to make major investments in its growth, assessing their readiness for change and how best to support that change. They had a particular challenge in the product development team, because the product development team had their regular publishing schedule, right? But they also felt the pressure of some unpredictable asks from various different people and departments as those people tried to explore new partnerships and so on, and needed sample product to give them. So the asks would come in, they would never know when, people would need them fast, but the team used to spin because they felt like they needed permission and instructions to move and what to prioritize. The vice president who headed up this department was remote, not always available. It caused a lot of spin, a lot of tension, a lot of stress. When we looked at the SOQ for this group, and you can see against the innovative benchmark and the gold circles here, right, we saw that it reflected absolutely what was going on in that environment, right? Freedom, no autonomy to make the decisions without checking for permission first, right? Idea time, instead of spending time really on idea testing and development, they were spinning, right? That's where their energy was going. Certainly wasn't a playful environment, right? Because of all the stress, and they weren't taking the risks to move forward. So with this particular group, we went in and we did a one-day workshop, and that workshop was all around the concept of what do we do when we don't know what to do. And we actually developed 6 common scenarios for requests that would come in. And in the teams, they built some plans for if we have scenario type A, we would do this, B, do this, etc., etc. And going out of that meeting, that I think meeting was on a Thursday. By the very next Monday, they got a request in from the CEO. They were able to look at their scenarios, identify the type, and move. And within 3 days, they developed a mini magazine that had actually real impact on the partnership that resulted from that. So you can turn climate around really quickly, and then they built the pattern into their everyday. And when we measured climate a second time for them, this is a couple of years later, you can see that they've made improvements on all sorts of dimensions, significantly on idea time and playfulness, and they'd improved their freedom and risk taking as well. Still a work in progress, but this planning, what to do when we don't know what to do, has now been embedded in other departments in the organization as well. So that's how it travels. So that was a fun one.
Yeah. So a lot of factors influence the success here, and you can see some questions in the chat, for example, around empowering organizational decision making. And what we know folks do in these organizations when they make these kind of changes, it's a freedom and autonomy issue. And it usually comes when there are too many levels of check that have to go in. How many decision points, how many levels do you have to go up before something gets approved? In the first example, they removed a lot of those layers that were being added over the years, so they got rid of that. And at the individual level, they gave what Jim Collins would talk about as freedom and responsibility within a framework. So they set the framework for people so that they could make decisions within a certain scope, and as soon as they came to that level where they hit the edge of the scope, that's when they needed to check in with their manager. So one level, removing levels of decision making, and then giving people more freedom within their own jobs to be able to make their own decisions day to day. So that's the way they empowered through system change and behavior change.
And in the second example, exactly that. They created the frameworks that gave them the freedom to make the decisions and move forward.
Yeah. But very concrete problem solving from the climate data. That was the neat thing about it. But what's exciting here is back to your competency framework, right? Talking about leadership. And so, yes, of all the variables that influence leadership, we want to echo what you're finding, which is through multiple studies as well, is that the leadership's behavior has the biggest impact on the climate that forms in a group, right? And what's interesting about climate, right, is it always forms. You can't not have climate. So it's always going to be there. And the biggest effect on it is leadership behavior. Anywhere from 60 to 80% of the variance on climate measures come from leadership behavior. So we know that. Great research there. And as we've seen with Eckfall and Nystrom and many, many years of research, climate has a profound influence on innovation, productivity, all of those variables, including engagement. So if you're looking for engagement, you can't have engagement, according to some of these studies, without having climate first, right? So it's climate engagement's an output. And so you see that connection. But a curious question then forms. If it's about leadership for a moment, what happens if you take climate out of the mix and you take assessments of all of these, remove statistically the impact that climate has on the equation here, to look at just leadership behavior and innovation and productivity, what happens? Well, we find multiple studies are showing that the relationship between leadership behavior and innovation and productivity goes to almost zero. Goes to almost zero. So what's going on? This is usually kind of a shock when we say this to leaders. They go, what do you mean I don't have a direct impact on innovation and productivity? Not according to the research. What happens, right, is leaders establish the climate. And then by establishing the climate, it's the climate that triggers the people to engage in the creative process that produces innovation and growth. So in other words, leadership's one of its primary responsibilities, one of its core, your capabilities leaned up against it when you say fostering psychological safety and all that relates to this climate question. The way leadership has an impact on innovation is not around climate, it's through climate. So the best thing a leader can do is set the right climate, and it's that climate that's going to trigger innovation and the likelihood of it happening.
So, that's kind of our take on climate. As Rob said, I think you might even have put them in the chat a little earlier, Rob. We have a couple of takeaways for you. One of is a creative climate checklist. So if you're a leader, if you're working on a team or in an organization, these are a series of questions that you can ask yourselves related to the climate patterns that will help you get a sense of what might be going on in your climate. If you are a consultant working with other climates, they're questions that you can use in conversations with your client to get a handle again on what's the climate like in the organization and whether an assessment, a more formal assessment like the SOQ, might be useful. So that's that. Feel free to use that. There's also a flyer on the situational outlook questionnaire, how it works, some of the impact, what makes it different, and then if you are interested in becoming certified, accredited, etc., there's some information on where to go to find out about that. And then finally, in terms of what's next, before we get to questions, for anybody who might not be in the ISPIM Innovation Leadership Group, Rob will send the slides out to everyone. If you're not in the group, please pop your email in the chat if you would like to get those slides. We'd also like to offer you a complimentary chance to sample the SOQ. So if you're interested in learning more and seeing what it's actually like and what the results look like, contact us, contact me, and we will make that happen for you. And then for those of you on the call today, and I know we've had some messages about people who wanted to be here but couldn't make it, so for anyone in the ISPIM group here, we'd like to offer a special offer of a 25% discount as a thank you for coming along today. So again, reach out if you're interested in that, and you can find out more information at our website, betterchangetools.com, about the SOQ and some of the other tools that we use as well.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very, very interesting and inspiring talk. One thing that I think, Brian, you mentioned at the beginning that innovation is about going to unknown territories and exploring unknown areas. From my experience of working in big companies, I've often heard this, great, we're going to be innovative, you can take all the risks you want, you can do whatever you want. And then 6 months later, they start to say, where's the money? I'm not sure whether you have any thoughts on that or where that fits into the model, because that's clearly not a consistent climate for people to work in.
It's so true, right? And climate, we think about it too, is climate is an engine, right? It's an engine for innovation and growth. So it adds power to the organization's ability to grow, but the organization has to also know where it's going. When it comes to innovation, it has to have a strategy, right? This will enable strategy. Without a clear strategy, that's one of the challenges that can say, are we going to get value from it when we produce it on that side? But there's also different kinds of innovation, right? There's the kind of innovation that is that radical shift type, right? That's completely new, paradigm shifting. That typically takes much longer to see a return on the investment, as we know. But the incremental type innovations,
Yeah.
right? The difference between the Wright brothers' first plane and all those increments over time, right? Those are more likely to deliver something a little bit more quickly. But that's a strategy question. What kind of innovation are we going after? And so therefore you can hopefully do a better job of setting expectations based on the kind of innovation folks are looking for. That we find to be the most successful. Biggest question, right? Strategically, what kind of change are we trying to make? You know, what kind of innovation do we need to pull it off? But yeah, expectation management is really big with that.
Yeah, I won't go into that, but I've had some experience with that. People say, "Yeah, we've got to be innovative. We've got to have radical breakthrough innovations, but we've got to be 100% successful." You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Right.
and
That's the
and in 6 months.
It's so true, right? That's where the tolerance for risk taking
Yeah,
comes in, right?
exactly.
They want innovation, but with zero risk.
Exactly.
Sorry, thank you for playing. Not like.
Thanks very much.
I just had an observation where I do a lot of work in this field as well, and I teach it. And it's interesting that you're the first that really separates culture and climate, or culture from climate. When I teach, I always use the definition of culture, which is a system of values, beliefs, and behaviors that defines our community, connects, and gets things done, which integrates them both, because you separate off your the behavioral aspects from the first two, right? The values and beliefs. And I'm just wondering what's the basis for that. I'm just curious. By the way, thank you for your thoughts. I think they're very interesting.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's neat. It's what Eckfall noticed when he went into the organization, Volvo at the start. And when he was looking at it, he just noticed there may have been a difference. There was a difference between what people believed and what they did. Sometimes they were consistent, sometimes they weren't. Right? And the things that seemed to affect creativity and the likelihood of it showing up to produce innovation were more of the experience people were having rather than the belief systems that were theoretically in operation. And so he found a way, he decided to pull those apart with the goal of trying to be able to target more effectively and efficiently the ability to impact innovation. And so by pulling them apart, he was better able to target and intervene rather than having it all bucketed as one thing, and knowing that there were so many variables at once, it was difficult to actually make a difference.
The thing is, for us, if you want to go after culture change, right, the fastest thing to do is to go after those behaviors, because behaviors can be changed quicker than values and beliefs and all those things. But the thing is, if you change your behavior patterns over time and consistently enough, people become to believe in them. And then that's when the underlying culture begins to shift.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's why we pull those apart.
Interesting. Yeah, indeed. I can see that the culture tends to be a bit of an intangible usually, and it's also complex. When you mingle it all together, it's more difficult to really own it and change it. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And remember,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead, please.
No, please.
I was going to say, remember, Eckfall's original entrance into this whole world was how many ideas were in the idea suggestion box hanging on the wall. It was a very concrete entrance into this, right? Are people engaged? And
Yeah.
you'll see them sticky pieces, they didn't have sticky notes back then, but they're little pieces of paper, right? And so he took that as a very behavioral indicator of what was going on. So he entered that way. And I think that's probably what helped shape his idea of pulling apart the behaviors he noticed and the feeling he got when he walked in the door versus the belief systems that were
Yeah.
under the surface, like the soil, as we were talking about, below the surface, tough to influence.
To the point around a lot of ideas, but how do you take them into execution, right? There's, as they say, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, in terms of taking it all the way to the finish line and then getting it adopted in the market. Have you done a lot of work around non-R&D organizations as well, in terms of how a total company actually lives this kind of culture, climate in your vocabulary?
Yeah, in fact, many wide range of organizations, and sometimes will be in the product area, and many times it's in other parts of the organization. It could be
Okay.
the administration HR area, because there's internal innovation, right? Internally focused, not commercialization, but internalization when you institutionalize something new inside the company, right? That's also innovation. And then when it's commercialized outside the organization, that's also innovation. So
Sure.
we look at it from both sides. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
we're constantly working with the full range of types
Cool.
of departments producing different kinds of innovation.
Thanks again.
Oh, you're
Thanks
welcome.
again.
Paul, we are just about out of time. I think we have about 1 minute left. As ever, it's always really hard to shoehorn everything into the time we have. But the thing is, we don't have to. I think carry on the talk, right? You will have Sam and Brian's details. Their emails are in chat. We will follow up with our community through LinkedIn, through the email list, with their slides, with the offer that they've made today. And I think if it's provoked you to keep chatting to them, then of course, keep chatting to each other and keep the conversation going. And can we have a very quick round of applause? Please feel free to unmute, remove your hat, throw it in the air.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam and Brian.
Really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you all. And
Yes, very much.
yeah, happy Easter weekend.
Yes.
To those who
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And-
Thanks.